Got it.
Okay, so welcome everybody. It's a Sustainable Success or Living Stronger Longer podcast. Recently changed the name. Today I have Daniel Thompson. This is the second time that I have Daniel on. Daniel, thank you very much for being here. Daniel is a former member of the Superslow Exercise Guild, where we first learned of each other, probably more in print than anything, seeing each other's names and various emails and things like that. But I enjoyed speaking with Daniel before. He's a critical thinker. And just before I pressed the record button, we started to get ready for this and started to talk about what we would cover today. And of course, we got off on a really good topic on various things and different things. So we're going to bounce around on various things. But before we start, Daniel, anything you want to add for your intro or to help viewers know you a little bit better?
The only thing I would add is, like you said, I used to be part of the Superslow Exercise Guild. I wrote a personal training manual that I gave out. I did it, what is it called? Where you open it up, Creative Commons. I set it up as a Creative Commons so anybody could use it, anybody could take it. And I'm glad I did that because a lot of people remember me from that manual. So that's good.
And some of the chapters from the second edition of the Superslow manual were written by you. Am I right?
Oh,
or at least you were quoted in them.
Renaissance of Exercise. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so both. But I think I've seen you've been quoted in the second edition too, the white book that I had.
Possibly.
Yeah. Maybe. And of course, there was the newsletters and whatnot. So what we were just talking about before I pressed record, I found interesting, which is, weight stacks. We were talking, just to put some context for listeners, we were talking about how strength is often measured in exercise research and how it's nebulous at best because often it's based on 1 rep max, which Dan and I are probably on the same page in saying there's a lot of skill involved with that, especially if you're using compound movements like a bench press or a squat or something like that. But we were talking about a leg extension, which has less of a skill component, but also then you can get momentum involved. And Dan was explaining how a different weight stack, as in the MedX weight stacks that move less, doesn't allow for more momentum and keeps the muscle more loaded throughout, despite any discrepancies in speed. How badly did I massacre that explanation, Dan? Can you fix it up?
Not too badly. You can always get momentum going. Once a weight starts moving, there is some momentum. So once inertia is broken, it's you're going. But because it moves, the weight stack moves less than the movement, it's very, very difficult to get momentum going. So that was one of the designs. Not many people know this. The most difficult part of a exercise machine to design is the weight stack. That was partly why when Arthur first started, he was using a lever with weights on the lever, pretty much like the hammer, the very first hammer pullover. The Nautilus pullover they used where you just put regular weights on.
Right.
But people wanted a weight stack and that was really, really difficult to engineer. And most people don't realize how much that is where most of the thought process of engineering of an exercise machine will go, is into the weight stack, and the weight motion, reducing friction, all that kind of stuff. But MedX, because especially with a low back machine, they had to make it, and with a neck, especially both cervical extension and cervical rotation, the weight stack has to move half as much, at least, as the range of motion of the actual movement. And because of that, it's really, really difficult to get momentum going, even if you go as fast as you can.
Right.
So in those machines, mostly you can keep loaded even going too fast. Now, if you use a machine or a free weight where the weight is moves at the same rate or the same distance as the movement, in other words, if my if my curl is 160 degrees, my weight stack has to travel that, whatever that same distance equivalent would be.
Right.
Now, some movements, like the neck and shoulder machine, do you remember the Nautilus neck and shoulder, the original one? The weight stack travels, I think, 3 times as much as the motion, because the motion for neck
That
and
was the
shoulder.
one where you were sitting there with pads here
Yeah,
and you were shrugging,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So you shrug, but to make the machine lighter and not have as much weight on the weight stack, they made the movement go.
Right.
And back in the day when Nautilus first started, in their mind, you needed to increase the weight as you went up. So many of the original cams increased. And it almost invited people to go fast. It's like they kept going faster and faster.
Right.
So some of the old cams did that.
Right.
When they learned better, when they learned how muscle fibers work and that they don't contract this way, that they all contract at the same time, they re-engineered some things to fix that. But with regard to performing correct performance on a leg extension, if you have a well-engineered device, it should be really difficult to get momentum going.
So one of the things that like I said to you before we started recording, is for the first time, I've heard this thing about the weight stack moving less and how that was a desirable thing.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand why till you explained it. And what came to mind is, so most of my leg pressing for the last, I guess I've had that machine now for 25 years, is Nautilus next generation leg press, which is, it's an all right machine. But when I've done, on the few times when I've trained on a MedX leg extension, one of the things that I found that surprised me, and maybe this is part of what you're describing, is when I first start the set, and we were using more or less super slow cadence, and the first rep, my thought was, my trainer has not put enough weight on this. I'm going to be here all day. And by somewhere around the 3rd rep, it was like, wow, did he suddenly add more weight when I wasn't looking? Because all of a sudden it would feel, and it went from feeling too easy to reaching very close to failure, an actual failure, in far less time than I originally anticipated with that machine. And I suspect that your explanation is partly why that's the case. Is that fair?
I'm not sure if that would be it's possible. I'm not sure if that would be. I would suspect that the strength curve would probably have more to do with it, with not the design strength curves, but the outcome. It's like on the hammer one, you have a strength curve that's kind of like this. It goes up.
Right.
I think the strength curve on the MedX one kind of goes up first and then down gradually, but not much, not very much. I don't remember the strength curve on the 2 NEST. I think that one was designed to go a little heavier in the beginning and then ease off a tiny bit.
It's certainly a very different feel. The other thing you were talking about is the early Nautilus machine. So I have a Nautilus torso arm here in the corner. Remember the ones where you were?
Is it the one with a curly bar and the chain?
And you were originally doing it behind your neck, right?
Okay, got it.
So I had already gotten rid of that bar, and I was using. Are you familiar with the mag grips, the maximum advantage grips, right? Yeah. And I was doing it either wide, pronated, or narrow like this. I would change the grips, and I would always do the front. I wasn't doing to the back. But that cam was so aggressive in the bottom. That, I was having clients do stage reps or J reps where they would focus because it just seemed like such a weird thing.
Here.
And then I was talking to Doug McGuff. Actually, I had a consultation with him not too long ago, and he suggested to me that what some people did with that machine and some of the earlier novice machines is they simply turn the cams around.
Yeah.
And so recently, somebody who's more mechanically inclined than me, one of my clients actually was coming later today, came over and did that. And it's not perfect because it's weird, and I've had to pin the weight stack type of thing in order to try to find a happy, but it's like a whole different machine.
Yeah.
And it feels so much better. It's probably too easy now at the bottom, for ideal strength curve. And yet when I fail at it, I don't fail. You would think I'm going to fail at the very top where it's really hard. But I actually fail somewhere. The last couple times I've used, I'm failing somewhere just maybe past the midpoint, which I'm thinking, okay, that's good because I'm not just failing at the sticking point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where the strength curve is so low. So I mean, one of the things we started to talk about before we started recording is I had posted a video on social media about a guy who was doing strict super slow cadence, and somebody had commented, somebody, as I mentioned, that I respect, about how many people are getting hurt, what does properly mean, what's perfect, and things like that. And I'll just tell you where I've sort of landed as far as my thoughts about proper exercise. I think there's a lot of hair splitting that goes on. And challenge me on this. That's why I'm saying it, because this is my thinking. I'm not saying this is the absolute truth I've come up with. I'm saying this is where my thinking is at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the first biggest difference, and this is going to sound stupid, is whether you actually work out or not. Right? Like the difference between
it's not stupid. It is not
a trained
stupid.
individual and a trained individual. And if there's, some sort of a reasonable program going, i.e. that it's challenging enough to challenge you, and that it has a fairly high degree of safety, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even when Drew did the little video about what he learned in the first 30 years of work, and he said, if I could clone myself 7 times and start from the beginning, and I'd use 7 different methodologies, I probably would have had the same sort of physique, right?
Yeah.
Along the way, because genetics trumps everything. But my qualifier to that is if you continue to work long term, right?
Mm-hmm. If you can work long term, yeah.
And of course that would involve not getting hurt, right? So in Ken Hutchins' thing about recreation versus exercise, one of the problems is if the body is not destroyed in the process of giving the stimulus, right? Which of course dictates whether you're going to do it long term. But then I think after that, how much hair splitting is there? And the other thing is when I hear people debating how to get the best results, part of me is going, this might sound weird, who cares about the best results? Because unless, so let's say you're training and you're going to be on a bodybuilding stage on next March the 6th, or you're competing in an athletic event which involves strength and conditioning. So regardless of, for now, let's just leave skill out of it, where the stronger you are, the better you'll do that day. As long as you're getting results, and you're not hurting yourself, if you're training for a lifetime, who cares if the results are coming a little faster or a little slower, because you don't have a deadline. You're training for life.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
You know what I mean? And then a lot of the other stuff becomes, I don't know, I'm going to shut up for a second, just let you throw in what's going through your head as you're listening to me.
Well, what I'm thinking is I'm remembering some of the clients and members at Gainesville Health and Fitness who live in Gainesville, and have been going to that gym, that facility, which is one of the largest semi-hit facilities in the world. And how, you know, the long-term members there. And they keep doing the same thing because it keeps their results. If they stop going, they realize they need to get going back. So I think the best way to go about that is, first of all, deciding, okay, I'm doing this long term. That has to be the primary decision. And I think for folks like us who are older, that's a little easier to do, because what is that joke? You know, like, why are so many older people in church? Because they're cramming for their finals.
Right, right.
Yeah. It's kind of like what we do. Our training, it becomes a little more focused and a little less, I want to say less intense. We do what we can. And we realize at this age, our energy is limited. So we're going to put our energy to exactly what we need to do, instead of just this, and just anything. Whereas when I'm 20, I'm ready to try anything. I'm 30, try anything. Yeah, not so much now. So, and now also at this older age, safety is more important. You know, when we were younger, I was much more careless and playful and try anything. But I think with what you mean, I think part of the problem when you talk about hair splitting, there's two things going on. I see that very, very commonly with people where size is focus, size is the goal,
Right.
Getting big. That focus, that concentration, in my thought, can take you in a direction sometimes it's not right.
Right.
I don't mean incorrect, but just by hyper focusing on size, you're led in a path that's a little away from it. Actually, you're
Right.
led, whether it's intensity or volume, you're kind of led too far to one side or the other. And once you remove size from the equation, that size is going to happen without your consent. You don't get the choice. You
Right.
can train, you can exercise, you can take drugs and get size, but you still don't have a determination of it. The only thing you have a determination of is what you do to get that size.
Right.
So you train. Right now, the options are volume and intensity, but there's a whole range in between those.
Right.
My thinking, and I think I've talked about this before with you, instead of having intensity at the top or the hierarchy of the decision making or of the thought process, for me, it's function dictates design. The function of the muscle. So when what we're talking about, what is proper strength training? What is proper performance? What is proper workout? What is proper exercise selection? What is proper? Function dictates design, dictates what is proper. There's your headline. From there, you have the tools of intensity, frequency, volume. What's the other one? Resistance.
Right.
So you have all these other. Now, most hit the frequencies at the top.
Or you mean the intensities at the top?
Yeah. Thank you. The intensity is at the top. And by having intensity at the top of the hierarchy of the thought, it can throw these off. But by having the engineering of function that dictates design and having the background that goes thousands of years, not just 50 years to Arthur, but thousands of years to math and engineering, you have a much more solid foundation. And I think proper, to define what is proper, you start there. That's the starting point.
Well, and kind of, I agree, because first of all, a bunch of thoughts coming in my mind. The whole volume, when people talk about volume, I always find that's yet another term that's not really defined.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, I tend to use a set length for me, and for some of my clients, even longer, because a lot of my clients are in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s, where, for me, I'm about 100 seconds is probably my typical set.
Mm-hmm.
I know people talk about 50 seconds and 60 seconds. And who knows, I haven't really experimented to see if that would make much difference. At this point, I think that's one of those hair splitting things, but I'm off on a tangent here. But so let's say that I do 120-second set, and somebody else is doing 3 sets of 10, and they're using a 2-2 cadence, which for a lot of people in the gym is actually pretty darn slow, actually.
Yeah, it's 1-1 usually.
Yeah, so 2-2 cadence, a set of 10 is going to be 40 seconds. So
most of the times I've timed people who are just conventional training, their sets are under 30 seconds. They rarely last even 30.
So I'm being generous, right?
Yeah.
So you're
giving somebody good form.
Their 3 sets are equivalent to my 1 set. So who's doing more volume? And if it's 30 seconds, I'm the one doing more volume. And let's face it, a lot of the sets that are being done are warm-up sets, which, despite all the debate about 1 set, 2 sets, whatever it is, I think warm-up sets probably don't make much of a difference one way or the other, because I don't think they really take a lot out of your recovery ability if they're way less than failure sets and they're warm-up sets.
Yeah.
I think what I mean.
They make a difference in rehabilitation. I think they are useful, and I think of things that way: useful or not useful. I think they are useful for rehabilitative exercise.
Yeah.
And sometimes necessary, but once that is no longer needed, it should be discarded.
Yeah, well, and then if they do it, unless it's endless and the speed is really bad, which, at one point I experimented many years ago with Vince Garanda's, 8 sets of 8 and 10 sets of 10 and stuff like that. And I found myself getting sore elbows just from doing that many reps.
Yeah.
But that's pretty extreme, right? 8 sets of 8 or 10 sets of 10 and stuff like that. But other than that, it probably is not that relevant to that. So the thing I would say about so-called volume is not that that those sets are detrimental, is they're just wasted effort.
Yeah, they're
wasted, even maybe not effort, because I don't think there's that much effort to go down. Almost wasted time. They're just spending more time than they need in the gym.
I think most people do them just because they see other people do them, and they're used to being. Most people haven't tried it one way or the other. Another thing about volume, do you remember the total tonnage theory?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the ideas about that is each repetition. So let's say you're using 100 pounds. So 100 pounds, 1 repetition, 100 total tons, 100-pound total tons. 2 repetitions, 200 pounds, 3, so if you follow that, the total tonnage theory, doing the same workout of HIIT style, 2 up, 4 down, and then super slow, the total tonnage theory says that the 2 up, 4 down is a lot more volume.
Right.
So again, like you said, we haven't really defined volume. Is it total tonnage, or is it how many times you do a concentric contraction? So there's a lot of ambiguity. Is that the right word? I think so. About what exactly volume is. For the most part, we refer to it as more sets.
Right. Yeah. Well, and to say, another sort of qualifier to my earlier, hair splitting beyond a certain thing, which may seem like I'm playing the devil's advocate myself. The other thing I do, though, is I still think it makes sense to have high standards, simply because it's a slippery slope. If I get into it doesn't matter, do whatever, it's a slippery slope. Like recently, I listened to a podcast, And, for example, Luke Carlson was on with Dr. James Fisher.
Yeah, I heard that.
And they were talking about, what makes a difference. And they started out by saying, the differences don't really matter, but then they kind of went into what could make a difference and talking about having enough intensity. And Luke Carlson, and Luke, if you're listening to this, you can correct me, or if I'm paraphrasing or misquoting you, but he said, the whole idea of not making faces and things like that, he says, I would rather have people, make a few faces, but get 2 or 3 more reps out than, stop as soon. He says some people just stop their set as soon as somebody starts grimacing or partially holding their breath or doing Valsalva and stuff like that. And as I listen to that, I'm thinking, yes, on one hand, I kind of agree with what you're saying to some extent, but I'm also thinking this could be the beginning of a slippery slope.
Yes, a
In
bad
other words,
habit.
why not teach people to maintain their composure and stoic and do it and still work as hard as they can? Because once you start to sort of relax things, just as, even what I was kind of surprised by is when they talked about frequency. And at one point they said, well, for some people, once a week might be better than twice a week. But, as a business model, that's not the greatest business model. And I was thinking, you're a scientist. Who cares about the business model? If that is what's better for an individual, that's what they should do, right?
Or change your business model.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, and I've heard different people. I've heard Fred Hahn, Fred.
Yeah.
I've heard, from the Renaissance, Al Coleman, right? And I've heard Luke Carlson recently, and they've either said twice a week is best, or in Luke Carlson, I believe his quote was, I've yet to see somebody who couldn't recover from 2 weekly full body workouts. And so whether it's optimal or not, they can recover from it. And when I hear it's best, going back to my earlier thing about who cares what's best anyways, but I also think I'm struggling with that blanket statement. Because if you let's say that you have a physical job, you work shift work, and maybe you like to play recreational sports on the side, and you've got young kids at home that maybe are affecting your sleep factors. I think definitely frequency, twice a week, maybe, depending on where you stand on the genetic bell curve, is likely way too much for you.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, especially somebody who is that active, like you just described. I think when you are in business, when you're the trainer, when you're the instructor, when you're the business owner, just like whether you focus on intensity or volume, you focus on the path that takes you business wise. And as a business, you're like, I got to cover, my rent, my cost, my everything. So your thoughts go that direction. As a scientist, or as a I don't want to say critical thinker, but as a scientist, as somebody who focuses on exercise, and you kind of have to remove that for just a moment and think about just the physical part of it, the medical part of it. So yeah, some people can recover. If those people were training on their own, those clients, would they train? That would be your first question.
Right.
Yeah, so adherence, if for me, I have better adherence with more times a week. I've learned that about myself. Just I require a pattern, and that's because of things up here, not here.
Right. Yes. There are other factors involved.
Yes. Yeah, there are other factors involved. So, making those determinations, a blanket statement, I doubt he really meant it as a blanket statement, probably just said it. But occasionally there are some clients or friends or trainees who do better training a little more frequently for adherence, for consistency.
Right.
And normal life will pull you back when you need to. It's, like birthdays come up, vacation trips, illnesses. So you get a break when you need it.
Right.
So I kind of understand that point, is that, like you said, consistency is the winner in the long run, no matter what training method is used.
So one of the things that we often talk about in our circles is safety.
Mm-hmm.
And so earlier I talked about that video that I posted about a guy doing a nice set of super slow strict, and
Yeah, I got it up on my screen.
and contrasting that to so-called explosive training. And then the gentleman who questioned it said, what's explosive anyways? Well, I guess I don't have a perfect answer for him right now, but I would think that at the very least, when people are encouraged to go as fast as they can, that's explosive, right? And they're saying, do this explosively. But then he went on to say, how many people are really getting injured? So I'll tell you, in my experience, which is a small, because I've been doing this now, training people for going on 4 years, maybe it's 4 years now. And, I'm doing 30 to 40 sessions a week. And probably over time, I've had a fairly low turnover. So maybe my total clientele has maybe been 50 different people. So that's a pretty small sampling. And not all of them are former exercisers. But of those that have been former exercisers, virtually all of them, when I start to talk about the safety aspects of it, and I talked about too much volume and too much force creating injuries, virtually all of them interrupt me to tell me about their various aches and pains.
Yeah.
So in my experience, now in fairness, some of them are former joggers and in various steady state activities. But even I know people who have been training with weights, because most people, to answer the question, how many people are getting hurt? Well, a whole bunch of people get hurt and stop exercising altogether. So in that, because, oftentimes, if you're going to go to the gym and try to work out, and particularly if it's later in life, because probably everybody in high school was doing various things in gym class or whatever. And let's face it, kids are getting hurt left, right, and center in high school. But back then it's like, whatever, you move on and you 2 weeks later you go back and do it again because you're young and you're stupid, which you can be excused for. Your gym teacher, not so much, in my opinion, but that's another story. But as we get older and you haven't been doing it for a while, people say, well, I'm out of shape compared to when I was in high school or college. I'm going to get back into it, and then quickly hurt themselves and quit and go back to being non-exercise. So I think that's a big slice. But then you get people who stick with it long term. My experience is many of them, I would say the vast majority of them wind up with injuries.
Yeah.
What's your experience?
Almost everyone that I worked with, both just regular clients and rehabilitative exercise, had something, whether it was caused from exercise, activity, or just life.
Right.
So there's always something you got to watch out for. Everybody has, a shoulder issue, a knee issue, a hip, an ankle. So there's always these things to watch out for. And those are situations that compromise exercise, or you have to get a little bit more specific with your exercise about that. And I think a lot of times when people get into training, and I'm guilty about this, if I see a gymnastics device, it's like common, you ever see like a pommel horse, the little mushroom?
Right.
I'll show you later.
Yeah.
And the guys do, like circle things around it. If I see one of those out, I have to just, my brain remembers being able to do it perfectly and well, and those life memories, and then I get up on it, I go around it once, and I'm like, I need some ibuprofen, quick. So and that happened. I was actually at Universal Studios, and I did that, and I'm like, I need ibuprofen. So I think a lot of times that happens as people try to go based upon their memory of themselves younger and effort, or the activities they used to do, whether it was biking, basketball, running, jogging, or going to the gym. And they start off what they remember and they get hurt. And
Right.
I think that's part of it. It's just a lack of knowledge. But I, I think a lot of people, instead of getting hurt, I think more people probably get discouraged than hurt. I think discouragement is more something we need to combat more in exercise, especially HIIT, than injury.
Okay.
I think a lot of people either lack of results, the
Is
exercise
that
is too
because of
hard.
unrealistic expectations?
There are a lot of things. Like you said, the results, unrealistic expectations, the effort versus the expectations. I've heard this one. The effort for the compared to the expectations is not equal. Some people said, I just don't want to work that hard. That's you'll hear that sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
So again, that was showed I did not set up the expectations correctly in the initial visit. That was my fault. But with the expectations of effort, that has to balance.
Right.
And when somebody goes and training on their own, they're going to see results quickly at first if they have not trained in a long time. Then they come to us, and then the efforts, you get the long tail of the results.
Right.
And of course, the outpouring of money and the outpouring of effort, they want quick results. So I think the expectation of results is a big part of it. But in HIIT, I think I see a lot of people drop out just simply because of it. The comparison of it doesn't feel worth it. The amount of effort compared to how the results they get. And I think, again, like I said before, that's a set of their expectations are from magazines, influencers,
Right.
from YouTube, TikTok, and their expectations are really, it's almost like, a 19-year-old looking at porn. They're going to have a completely different wrong expectation of what that relationship is like than it's the same thing. Fitness porn is what we're watching.
Right.
And people are trying to make their organizational decisions or their result decisions, how they exercise decisions based on fitness porn, which is, I'd rather, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to go with food. Give me some good hot chocolate with coconut with pepper in it and all that kind of, But the expectations around us as a practitioner, as a somebody who teaches, that's probably the hardest job of a trainer is to shape those expectations realistically, because the amount of stuff around us is just too difficult.
Well, and to some degree, I mean, the old Darden books, all the Darden books had pictures by Chris Lund.
People who weren't HIIT trainees.
Who weren't doing HIIT training, who were professional bodybuilders, the very best in the world, who were on steroids.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you know a little bit about bodybuilding, you know that it's also, other than being genetically gifted and drug enhanced, the fact that they shave their bodies, the fact that they're tan, the fact that they know how to pose properly, and the fact that they're lean and mean in these pictures, it's all completely distorted, right?
Yeah. And the camera angles are designed to maximize that look.
And I like your term, fitness porn. I don't know if you noticed recently on social media, on your social media feeds, you see these commercials for the 30-day lazy man's workout. It's supposed to be a lazy man's workout.
Yeah.
And I got this guy who looks like he's, our age or whatnot. He's doing these various calisthenics and he's ripped. And I'm looking at those things and I'm going, I could not do the move. I mean, I'm impressed with what he's doing, but because as a feat, as a demonstration of agility and fitness. But I'm looking at it going, I could not do those things that he's doing in that video if my life depended, nor would I. I can see some where he's doing push-ups and he's raising one arm and then doing the other one, and then he's twisting his body and doing all these things. And I'm thinking, your ankles got to be, you know, you can twist ankles and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, I don't think I could do it. My elderly clients and even my young clients, there's almost nobody that can do those movements, right? And so the term fitness porn comes to mind. The other thing too that I found with no small degree of frustration is that I haven't had people drop out because of lack of results. I've had a couple of people questioning about, oh, my buddy does this and he's jacked and stuff like that, and things like that. But, you know, I kind of remind them about, you know, that's your buddy and that's a whole other thing. But what I have found, and I remember Darden saying way back when, I would like to see the HIIT community more serious about dieting. Because you've got strong people, but you don't have a lot of HIIT people that look fit. And the fact is, it's true that if you diet down, whatever exercise you're doing, if you can get lean enough so that you can show whatever results you have, is way different than if you're covered with some fat, right? What I found with clients who have come to me and start asking me about diet, and I'll go off on a bit of a tangent here. I keep it really simple. I'm not claiming this is optimal, but I think it's a great starting point. I say start by measuring and counting what you eat. Start off by consuming less than 2,000 calories a day, and make sure you're getting at least, depending if you're a man or a woman, between 100 and 150 grams of protein in there.
Yeah.
And I don't care what else you do, because whatever it is, you'll have taken gigantic first steps into getting better. Later on, you can worry about what's optimal and
all that kind of stuff.
But to me, those are the pillars. But anyways, simple as that is, very few people, I don't know if they're willing, there's just that there's so many temptations in our society to eat so much junk and social events and things like that. But that seems to be an almost insurmountable task in people's minds.
It is. And in some ways it can be. One of the things that the way I approach or used to approach it, and kind of still do with friends, when somebody asks me, how do I lose weight? I was like, well, what are you going to eat tomorrow? And usually the answer is, I don't know. And simply knowing is half the battle, knowing what you're going to eat tomorrow. And Mike Mincer used to do this, is where he would have somebody just, don't change anything yet. Let's see where you are. Write down everything you eat for 2 weeks or a week. I'm definitely one who, as far as losing body fat, behavioral changes are primary. And then once your body is in a, fairly lean condition, then your macronutrient balances become much, much more specific and important, and more for once you're at a more lean condition, you're eating for performance, whether it's life performance or sports, either way. But to get lean, you have to change behaviors, because behaviors are what got you overweight. And so I'm kind of similar. I focus on that. It's like, let's see where you are, and then a simple meal plan. Just write down what you're going to eat tomorrow.
Yeah, you're right. Well, and you make a good point. I've actually said that to people, people in my own family. I said, for a week, I really like this phone app called Chronometer.
Yeah, man.
It's a great tracking app. And I tell people, don't change anything, just track it.
Yeah.
So you can see where you're at now, because you might be surprised, especially with a lot of women, but even men too, that how little protein you're actually consuming. Or maybe I'm wrong. So maybe you'll find that you're already eating plenty of protein and you're fine, but you'll probably be surprised by what you see when you analyze what you're eating, right?
Yeah. What I would like to see is a app that can, um, you can do that, record for a few weeks what you eat, and then from that data, it can then give better suggestions and suggest meal plans. Because you're gonna,
Yeah.
because it's gonna take the meals you like.
Well, I think, I read an article once about long-term people who had lost fat and maintained it for 5 years or more,
Hmm.
which, by the way, is a very small percentage of people,
Yep.
right? And I forget some of the rules, and I agreed with some of them, but the one of them that I remember was, if you bite it, write it.
Oh, I like that one. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which is basically, and over the years, and people laugh when I say I struggled with my weight, because they look at me and say, "You're not struggling with your weight," because somebody says that, they're portraying something. But the fact is that I am where I am after many trials and tribulations, and I've tried various things, and I've tried to get away from tracking, because let's face it, it's a pain in the butt.
It is.
Right? And I've been able to maintain some success, and this may very well just be me and my personality. I've been able to maintain some success with various things, intermittent fasting or a different thing. And I can see if people don't want to use an app. I like the idea of people who prepare their meals in advance on a Sunday, freeze a bunch of portions, and then
Hmm.
have their meals all prepared. But that's still measuring. You're not using an app, but you're still measuring. You're tracking in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form. But over the years, after a while, my addictive nature or the food, and I just love food, has always gotten the better of me. And I've always had to go back to tracking, to now where I've just come to the conclusion that tracking is when I have a cheat day. So my rule right now is, even if I'm having a bad day, a cheat day, I still track. And full disclosure, I might not be as meticulous as tracking that day. I might do it at the end of the day from memory and stuff like that, which is not
Yeah.
ideal. But I always going to track, right? And,
Hmm.
and I've been doing it now for over 4 years. I went on a fishing trip about 3-4 weeks ago, only to discover that there was no internet. Well, I knew there was no Wi-Fi, but I didn't realize that my app required not Wi-Fi, but internet. My app required internet in order to work. So I missed 3 days of tracking by necessity, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
when I was on a camping trip. Other than that, I've been tracking now for like over 4 years, right?
Oh, good. Good.
Every day.
I would say a camping trip would be a good break from that.
Well, but even, like people say at Christmas time or things like that. So my rule, so I'm a recovering drug addict, right? So when you're a drug addict, you count clean days, right?
Okay, so I get it. I get it.
So the challenge with food is you can't abstain. Clean days, if you're have a substance problem, is pretty simple. Any day that you haven't consumed that substance is a clean day, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can't not. So my definition, what's worked for me mentally, is my definition of a clean day is I wrote it down. Even if I ate, cheesecake and chocolate cake and ice cream and pizza, as long as I wrote it down, because what that does is it's still, even though, and I actually tell people you need those days. And it's kind of like a financial budget. If you save most of the time, every now and then you can afford to go on a spending spree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So if you diet most of the time, you can every now and then go on an eating spree, and you get back on it. But if I was to stop tracking for a week, it would probably take me another 2 weeks before I started tracking. And by then, because all diets are yo-yo diets, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You criticize diets, they get people, so that diet doesn't work. It's just a yo-yo diet. Well, if you look at the statistics of how many people gain their weight back, almost all of them, that would mean all diets
Hmm.
are ultimately yo-yo diets, right?
Yeah, exactly. People, it takes a while. When I worked with people, I tried to stay away from the word diet. I would use the word meal plan or eating plan.
Yeah.
or eating method or anything like that. I tried to not use the word diet on purpose, mostly because I wanted people um, to look at it as a pattern change, a behavior change, more so than a meal plan.
So,
I mean, than a diet, than a
and
diet.
tell me about successes or challenges that you've had in getting people to actually adhere to these eating plans.
The successes I had were when, especially, this was in like in the 2090, between 98 and 2006, when I would do email back and forth with them where they had to send me an email, their meal plan for the next day. So that would be like you writing it down. That
Right.
would be kind of similar. That would be nice. I'd love to have something where an app where the trainer can check, their clients, all their clients'
Right.
meal plans. That would be cool. The biggest thing was let me think. Do you remember the Body for Life program?
I've heard of it, but I don't
Yeah,
know the details of it.
they had in that they had a really good Excel spreadsheet for meal planner.
Right.
And I used something similar to that for quite a while, where they would plan it out. Some people do better just planning one day ahead of time.
Right.
Some people do better planning out for the week, and then some people do even better planning out and making the meals for the week.
Right.
But it's most important to just at least one day ahead of time. That's all. As long as you can get people in that pattern, they will have more control of their food. And the meal plan, think it like I said, one day ahead of time, it gives you just a little bit more control of what comes in.
Right. That's good. That's good. Well, because my point of reference with this often is recovery. In recovery, I think of the term of people hitting bottom. And
Yeah.
people have to be ready, right? Like right now, I've got some family members who have come to me and said, I want to do this. In other words, it wasn't me nagging them, which could be hurtful and not welcome,
Annoying,
whatnot,
annoying
right?
at the least. Yeah.
Right. But so that tells me they were ready, right? And what I think happens is if you advertise your personal training business as we'll get you stronger, and they come here with the purpose of working out and getting stronger, and then you bring up diet or meal plans or however, right? And they're going to say, well, yeah, that seems like a good idea, but that's not why they came to see you in the first place.
Yeah.
So, it's and part of them, even though you educate them otherwise, we're kind of hoping the exercise was going to do that for them. Right. And we know that's not the case. But I think that if you advertise yourself as a nutrition or a weight loss specialist, whatnot, and then you charged an inordinate amount of money for your services, your success would improve dramatically simply by the fact that people would only come to you once they were really committed to it. Because they know they know exactly what they're coming to you for. And secondly, the price would eliminate anybody who wasn't really serious.
Yeah. That's I think there were some like what are they called? Boutique. You remember way back in the day in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Elaine Powers Studios?
I
They
don't
were all
remember
pink. It was mostly Universal equipment. And you remember the old Chrome Universal equipment, the standalone stations? They even had one that had like a twisty thing. And
I don't remember
one
the
of my,
twisty thing, but there was one in my high school.
yeah. So those usually had a diet program with them, the Elaine Power system.
Okay.
And I remember the places were pretty expensive. They were pretty, somebody else can correct me on this who went to one maybe, but they were pretty expensive. So people who could afford that and who could do it and outlay that much money to do that usually got results. And I think the time commitment, money commitment, and effort commitment from people when it comes to food and nutrition do make a difference.
Right.
I think in modern times, not thinking about it is actually part of the problem.
Right.
Is how you get overweight by eating by accident or just by eating with no plan. And because the rest of the world this is the first time in history that we have an unending supply of food. We throw away more food than we eat. We literally do that.
Right.
And so whereas before we had to match our energy to the food we were going to go catch or grow.
Right.
So, so we don't have that anymore. And we still have not adapted to that yet. I think we got a couple hundred more years before we really have a clue of that.
Have you read the book by Herman Pointzer, if I'm pronouncing
Burn.
Burn?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things
also his work partner, I forget the guy's name. He wrote the book Exercised. They were both involved in research for the tribe in Africa about walking and stuff like that. Yeah, I think a lot of that goes together.
Is that book Exercise one you would recommend?
Yes. It kind of talks about a lot about the things that we talk about in different ways, and in more of a social how it affects society and
Right.
the history of exercise and how we do these things. And then of course, like in medical terms, you have mismatches for diseases, mismatches for exercise. At the end of the book, he talks about what's his name? I forget. Anyway, Exercised is the name of the book, and it's a similar type of book as Burned.
Okay, because I thought the couple of good points that were made in Burn could have been summarized in a pamphlet. There was actually parts of that book that I felt were filler, and
I think Exercise was much better.
So, but what I did like though is, and for readers, that just to bring them back was the idea that our metabolism adjusts, because he had measured the metabolism of hunter-gatherer tribe compared to North American couch potatoes, and surprisingly found that despite all the extra activity, they were still burning about the same amount of calories as us, because your body adapts. Just puts context for somebody listening. But the other part of it that I thought was neat is when he pointed out that even without dieting, if you do the math, and I explain this to clients, if you stop and you look and you look at somebody was in high school 40 years ago, and they've gained, I'm not going to do the math here during the podcast, but let's say they've gained 60 pounds still there, and you figure out how much that comes to per year and how much that comes to per month and per day, you will see that your body, in and of itself, without any effort of dieting and in all the junk and everything else, has still done a really good job, when you think about it, of balancing intake and outtake, because the error is like really small.
Yeah.
But over 40 years, the cumulative error adds up, right? And so, but the problem is, once you're 40 pounds overweight, you can't wait another 40 or 100 pounds overweight or whatever. You can't wait another 40 years to lose it, right? Because you just make small adjustments the other way, you'll start to go the other way. But I think that presents a real challenge, though, because even though the book doesn't talk about it, and Ken Hutchins and whatnot talks about it's all diet, and I agree, but I suspect two things that aren't covered in the book. The first one is, if you were very inactive and you suddenly became very active, and I'm going to ignore overtraining here and everything for the sake of my explanation, that I think short term, I don't think your body adjusts its metabolism instantly the way it adjusts your body temperature. Your body temperature is not going to fluctuate very much. Otherwise, you're in trouble, right? You're going to have to shift if you're cold, or sweat if you're hot, or else if it goes above, then you're in trouble. I suspect that metabolism does adjust, but I don't think it's as quick. It might take a couple months, right? And the couple month is completely a number I'm pulling off out of my butt. You know what I mean? I have no idea. So
I guesstimate my swag on that is 6 weeks.
yeah. So short term, it would do it. But then all of a sudden they hit a plateau, and then the person says, well, now I got to do more aerobics, more whatever. And then it becomes literally, right? But I would think that even caloric deficit caused by diets, if they're too extreme or too prolonged, would cause the same change in your metabolism to adjust for that.
I think so too. And like I said, it's about 6 weeks, you know, where your body kind of balances.
Which is why, going back to my earlier statement about if you save most of the time, you can splurge once in a while. I think the cheat days are not only something you can quote unquote get away with, they may very well be a necessary part of the long-term process in order to keep your body guessing.
Oh yeah, yeah. I still use cheat days if I don't really diet much, but occasionally, it's like, yeah, like Sunday, my wife's birthday. That was quote cheat day. I did not think about it. You know, I ate a tub of popcorn and ice cream. But the next day I backed off a little bit. So I did kind of a reverse cheat day.
Right.
And got real strict. So yeah, similar type thing. You kind of balance it out. But like I said, I think for most people, they got to get a handle on their behaviors to get rid of the fat, because
Right.
the behaviors are what, you know, the food is a result of the behaviors. The behaviors they've got to fix to get their body fat down.
And it got to be lifelong behavioral change. And I tell people I'm not a very good salesman, because a lot of people in our industry would say, I'm going to melt the pounds off you and you're going to be in great shape and you're going to look great. What I tell people is, this is the hardest thing you're ever going to do, and the odds are overwhelmingly against you. And unless you realize that from the beginning, you're going to fail. Right? So that's a pretty lousy sales pitch. But I also think I'm being honest with people.
Yeah, it's difficult for us because to deliver and to do our this kind of activity and this kind of profession correctly, you have to be very upfront, very almost blunt about what's going to happen. But the industry that we work in, we like to think we're health professionals. We still work in the vanity industry. We're still part of the vanity industry.
Right.
And the vanity industry controls how the people that come to us, what they think, what they say. So we have to deal with that. Well, we're still on the same level as nail techs and hair salon.
Yeah, maybe less so what your earlier statement at the beginning when you talked about things change as we get older.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So at the beginning, before we started recording, and I'm looking at the clock here a little bit, and one of the things I said I always am interested to find, because you've been at this, because when I first discovered, I first read the Nautilus bodybuilding probably around 1982. So there's a scary thought. That's 40 years ago. And then probably discovered in probably the Nautilus advanced bodybuilding book, where Darden referred to Superslow. Yeah. And from there, I got the Superslow manual. And then I reached out and called Ken Hutchins on the phone, because I had some questions and he invited me to join the guild. So that we're going back to the 80s. Mm-hmm. And now recently, you and I are both members of Drew Bay's hit list. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of good information, all over the place. And I'm sure you're listening. And of course, today, the internet, we're not just going to the bookstore and buying books by Darden or Hutchins or whatever. There's endless good, bad, and ugly on the internet and information. How has your thinking evolved in the last year, if at all?
Not much. In 2009, I think it was, I started when I kind of transitioned out of exercise for a while and went into work into IT. I worked at the University of Central Florida in the engineering department, and I was around a lot of engineers of all different kind of disciplines, electrical, mechanical, aerospace, civil, industrial. So I got to hear and see that material all around me. And I think that was where my thinking changed. This function dictates design has to be the top, not intensity. So that has been consistent with me for probably about 10 years. What changes, I guess, is all these other dials below function dictates design, intensity, frequency, the other factors, the main 5 pillars of fitness
Right.
that he talks about. Dialing those is where I kind of think, how do I do this now? Recently, I'm playing a lot with time static contraction and practicing and learning. And I put up a video of my, I don't know if you've seen it yet, of my collection of my catalog of lower body exercises
Right.
that I do for time static contraction. And right now I'm using exercises that I don't have a dynamic option. I'm doing the time static contraction. If I have a suitable dynamic option means it is not an exercise that is compromised effort. Compromised, like squat has compromised effort because you can't truly go to failure. Bench press, same thing. You can give a good effort, but you can't really do a full effort, a complete full effort on either of those exercises. So I try to use exercises that allow for a full effort. I'm not able to yet. I'm still in treatment. So I'm still working up to full effort.
Right. At one point, you had stated that you felt that after training yourself for a number of years, you felt that you would have gotten much better results if you'd have been doing supervised workouts.
Yes.
Now, so do you think because your intensity wasn't enough, because earlier you said intensity putting it at the top, and I do think that sometimes people in the so-called HIT community, I just hate those labels, by the way, put that on the pedestal, fall into the same trap of more is better, right? Because we criticize the so-called, again, volume people for more is better, and yet I find sometimes we turn around and make the same error. We just substitute intensity for volume.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But
yes.
The implication I got from your statement, and which you can clarify, was that you felt that because you were doing unsupervised workouts, your intensity was not high enough, and that you'd have gotten significantly, depending how you define the word significant, better results had you had supervised. Do you still?
Yes, I still believe that. And the reason is, I going back and thinking of how I trained people and how I worked with people. Most of my clients, I probably were able to train and instruct them, and they were able to train much harder than me because I guided them through that. And I realize when I'm training myself, and you're in that fight or flight moment, you have to have a guide there to get through that.
Right.
And I like to think, I have mentally sturdy. I'm, that I can do these things and train myself and stand outside of myself and instruct. No, that's it's not, at least me. I would really need somebody to do like I would to me. Like having like you or Drew or another somebody else to guide me through those times, those moments.
So let me ask you an unfair question, which I'm not looking for a black and white answer to, because it may be an impossible one. But just how much better would your results be? How would you measure how much better? I know that's impossible because you don't have a crystal ball. You can't turn the clock back and do it.
My results, I think, really would have been faster from the beginning. If I had started in the beginning.
Right.
I probably, my results, I got eventually pretty good results using other kind of stuff and everything. So I kind of figured out where my body was going to get to.
Right.
I think I would have gotten there within a year or less if I had had somebody working,
Right.
somebody standing and helping me do that.
So not necessarily better, but faster.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I would have gotten there. I would not have gotten more results. I don't think like Drews was talking about, it doesn't matter what kind of thing you used. The results are going to be the same.
All roads lead to Rome.
Yes. Yeah.
As long as you don't destroy your chariot on the way.
Yeah. Yeah. You know how when we train people, and I've done this, a lot of hit trainers or hit enthusiasts will like, oh, I want to work out with you, and find out, so like they come and I'll take them through a workout. Oh my God, I haven't been training hard. That was the hardest workout. We've had that. We've all had that where somebody finds out how much effort they can produce.
Right.
And every once in a while in your own training, you kind of surprise yourself and you're like, whoa, that I have not been working that hard, And I think those moments of clarity are kind of what I'm judging against, where that moment when you had the absolute hardest you've ever worked on leg press, the absolute hardest you've ever worked on chest press. So those are kind of like my benchmarks of full effort.
Yeah, I can remember. I mean, Blair Wilson is a trainer in Toronto. When I worked in Toronto, and those are my most recent experiences, but I've been trained by other people as well. And yeah, I remember being in the dressing room after the workout and just feeling, and looking in the mirror and thinking, wow, I'm pumped up, and just wondering, I wonder if I was training with him all the time, would it make a huge difference? And interestingly, one of the things I've recently made a commitment to do is to enter a master's bodybuilding contest in 2024. So I don't know if you know, but I did that in 2008. So part of it is from a marketing standpoint, from the point of view that if I can do this at 65, and the nice thing, I'm going to be 65, that it is, the nice thing about being 65 is you get judged, because you get judged way more generously because you're 65.
Yeah.
If you look that way at 45 or 35, they'd say, well, what the hell? Right. But if you're 65, I mean, if people think you're amazing. Right. So, but I guess the question I'm asking myself right now, and I'm actually going to elicit some advice from somebody for dieting and stuff like that. A gentleman that I referred to earlier, who's competed and naturally and done well. Mm-hmm. And partly because a coach in all things, like you were just saying, whether it's intensity or just adherence or whatever it is helpful. But then the question I ask at this point in time, so first of all, is it possible at my age, after 40 plus years of training, while in a caloric deficit, to actually put on muscle? I believe the answer, if I'm being realistic, is no. That at this point, my goal will be to lose as little muscle as possible in the process of getting ripped. And I would
agree with that last.
A real pleasant surprise if I was able to put on any muscle at all at this point.
I would agree. The goal primary is to save the muscle you got, is to keep that. And try to lose as little as possible while trimming down. I think if you were under 40, you might be able to gain a pound or two. Remember the Nautilus diet?
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people were able to gain 15 pounds of muscle on can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. My battery just went low.
Yeah.
Some people were able to gain 15 pounds of muscle on a caloric deficit, but they hadn't been training. You've been training. So holding on to what you got is going to be, if you do gain anything, I'll be impressed.
Yeah, well, I mean, at this age, caloric deficit or not, gaining. Because I mean, one of the things and you know, in that podcast with James Fisher, Dr. James Fisher and Luke Carlson, when they talked about results and whatnot, James Fisher did make a very good point. Is first we have to define results, right? Which is, you know, all right, are you gaining muscle? Obviously is one measure. But then if you're an older person and you're simply maintaining what you've got, when in the absence of training you would be losing, that's also a result.
That is progress.
And if in you know, depending on your age and whatnot, if you're actually all you're doing is slowing down the loss, you know, slowing down sarcopenia, more so than if you weren't training, that is results. So it becomes very difficult to measure, you know what I mean? Because you don't have, you know, you don't have the evidence you see and the evidence you don't see. So if you're training, you'd have to be able to compare your clone who wasn't training.
Yeah.
Or was training in another methodology or whatever it is, right? And that's the thing. We don't have clones. We can't clone ourselves. I always say it's kind of like fishing. You know, when you're fishing and you're not catching fish in one spot, you want to move spots, but then you're thinking, geez, how will I know if I hadn't stayed in this spot that they weren't about to start biting? When I go over and I get to the other spot and they're still not biting, should I have stayed? Well, you don't know. You can't be two places at once, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, I have to get ready. This is
okay.
Good. Hopefully I'm guilty of monopolizing these things and not being a good questioner and listener, so I apologize for that.
No need to apologize.
So, but anyways, thank you very much for taking the time, and please send me the link to your YouTube channel and your latest videos. So when I do publish this, I want to make sure that it links to yours as well.
Okay.
So we can cross-link to each other.
All right.
Have a wonderful day, Daniel. Thank you again.
You too, and good luck on your training for your bodybuilding contest.
All right. Bye for now. I've said it publicly now. I can't back
now
up.
now it's good to go. You got to do it.
Bye for now.